So Zero Hour is the story in DC Comics where Green Lantern successfully destroys the universe and then tries to recreate it. And it's really, really cool. And in fact, this actually has a iconic moment that kicks it off, where Hal Jordan, after the events of Emerald Twilight, when he had destroyed the Green Lantern Corps, all the Guardians were dead, that he's just kind of like standing out there in emptiness. And he says, "It's gone so wrong. All those people, Coast City, the universe needs a protector, a real guardian to right these wrongs. The universe needs me." And he says, "Time for a new start, a clean slate, a remade universe, my universe." And even go so far as to kind of ponder whether or not a single universe would be enough. And the beautiful thing about this moment is Hal Jordan gives us everything we need to know about what is going on and what's been going on, and how he has been responsible for all this wonkiness throughout the time stream. So what he says is, "I knew that I had never asked for anything," right? "The one time that I did, I was denied. And it dawned on me then just how unfair the universe really was, how much in need it was of a makeover." Now, that's a reference back to Emerald Twilight, right? The idea that following the destruction of Coast City, that he had wanted to recreate Coast City, right? He wanted to use his ring to do it, which he did, but he was chastised for it. And instead of the Guardians being empathetic to it and just saying, "You know what, let him have this moment until he's able to work through his grief. But if it goes on too long, then we'll say something." Instead, they were like, "You use your ring selfishly, you will be disciplined for it." And it pissed him off to no end. That's why Emerald Twilight happened in the first place. But that's why he says, "But now it's gone, as are the Guardians. I say we need a new start, a fresh beginning, done right. I tried this before, right? But I was limiting myself when I tried to remake Coast City. Fixing one city does not help when the whole world, the whole universe is messed up. This is my blank page for creation, my chance to remake everything the way it should be. You should appreciate the opportunity to see this." So the question has to be asked here is, how did we get to this point where Hal Jordan effectively became God, powerful enough to wipe out all of existence and to recreate it in his own image? Because that's what we're talking about here. Okay, so let's talk about the nature of Zero Hour, and then we'll circle back around to this point. So all of this hinges on something called hypertime. And hypertime in DC Comics was basically a way to bring back the multiverse without really bringing back the multiverse. And here's what I mean by that. So before the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, you really had a multiverse, different alternate realities. And these alternate realities were wide and varying. In one universe, you had Captain Carrot. I love Captain Carrot. I don't even know what Captain Carrot's doing these days, but I need to find out. You had Captain Carrot and his zoo crew, so anthropomorphic animals who were basically stand-ins for the Justice League in that reality. In another universe, you might have the Crime Syndicate, which were basically evil versions of the Justice League, where morality was inverted in that universe. In the post-crisis landscape, when the multiverse was eliminated and all you had was one singular timeline called New Earth, then on that Earth, it wasn't simply multiple versions of the main DC universe. It was, hey, so what if there were a timeline where everything in this universe is the exact same, except Bruce Wayne's parents never died? What does that look like, right? What if in this reality, everything is the exact same, except maybe Hawkman is a different person instead of the one that we know in the main DC universe? That's how that works. Now, colloquially, truth to tell, for most people who are reading DC Comics, there wasn't really a discernible difference between the multiverse and hypertime. And the fact that there have always been so many people who have been asking what's the difference between them basically illustrates the point that there's seemingly no real difference at all. But hardcore hypertime fanatics will tell you there is a difference, and they'll split hairs to give you that explanation. But beyond that idea, and focusing on the nature of Zero Hour itself, where Zero Hour technically gets read in reverse from issues 4 all the way down to 0, issues 4, 3, and 2 is basically just continuity stuff. So for example, like it looks like the main villain of the story is a guy by the name of Extant. That's how it appears. Extant faces off against the Justice Society of America and basically ages everybody up. They stop being youthful, and ultimately it leads to them either dying or retiring. For example, Alan Scott walks away from being a Green Lantern, gives the ring to Kyle Rayner and says, "You're the Green Lantern now," which was basically a way for DC to remove Alan Scott as the last remaining Green Lantern if they really were, and they were, going forward with the idea that Kyle was the only Green Lantern that was left. Another good example was that Hawkman's continuity was a mess after Crisis on Infinite Earths. So what DC did is they took Hawkman, the original Carter Hall, the new Hawkman, Qatar Hall, which I think is how you pronounce it, and Hawkwoman, Hawkgirl, and basically just combined them all together into one person. That was it. And then he just like disappeared for a while, I think. The only thing that we really need to concern ourselves with as it pertains to what's going on with Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, is that for reasons that were not fully understood, for Wave Rider and the Linear Men, who were kind of like the time police of DC Comics, preventing paradoxes across the universe, as well as Metron, who was like the watcher of DC Comics from Marvel, that the universe seemed like it was coming to an end. That quite literally entropy, the ending of all things, was moving backward through time. Not only that the beginning of all things was moving forward in time. So in essence, the entire universe was coming to an end from both sides and closing in on the present day. And so between the two of them, they just started marshaling forces. And so because of the fact that it looked like the villain was extant, all these marshaled forces ended up coming together to face off against him directly. The kicker about this was that any character in the present day who had originated in the far distant past, they were erased from existence because that part of history was now destroyed as that part of the universe or that part of time was being erased. Anyone from the future who was in the present day, they were also destroyed because their part in the future was being eradicated. So this meant characters like Impulse and even Booster Gold were wiped from existence. And so all you really had were just present day superheroes and in some capacity, alternate reality counterparts that were here when all these anomalies were popping up. Those anomalies were also the reason why guys like Batman weren't here, because literally he was momentarily wiped from existence. And the final bit of an ingredient here actually came in the form of Jay Garrick going and pursuing the Spectre. The Spectre was already aware, at least on some level, of what was going on. In fact, he had been told that by Metron, effectively the Watcher from Marvel Comics and DC, but the Spectre didn't want to have anything to do with it, right? Because from his perspective, if the universe is ending early, well, then the universe is ending early. What are you going to do, right? Like, I just focus on crime and injustice, and that's it. But when Jay Garrick shows up here and confronts the Spectre, that's when the Spectre basically makes it clear to Jay, he realizes someone is doing this. There is a person that is responsible for all of this. And so the Spectre chooses to get involved. And so all these little threads and little tidbits all come together when they go to confront Extant, and Superman goes to deliver this blow, to quite literally take him out. And this fist appears out of nowhere and just says, "You will not take anyone, old friend." And everyone turns around and realizes Hal Jordan is there. And so that brings us back to the point from the beginning of the video. The cool thing about this is he says, first of all, Batgirl, because again, this is Barbara from a different reality, do not call me Green Lantern. Call me Parallax, because she goes to call him Green Lantern. And he says, and I'm not crazy at all. I'm the same man I always was, which is why I have the courage to make things right. He says, as superheroes, we were usually so focused on solving the day-to-day problems that we almost missed the bigger ones, like the destruction of Coast City and even the original Crisis on Infinite Earths. That will all change for the better on my Earth. And that's the thing. Guy Gardner approaches him and says, listen, man, like, you beat the crap out of me a couple of months ago, and I'll give you that, right? Which, I mean, how could he not? It happened in Guy Gardner Warrior 18 to 21. Yeah, he got the hell beat out of him. He says, but if you think I'm just going to let you get away with this, right? The funny thing about this is that the statement's kind of made, we have to let him get away with it, Warrior. I mean, it looks like our only option. I mean, look how powerful this guy is. Like, quite literally, he has led to the destruction and wiped out the entirety of the universe. How do we face off against a guy like that? Now, I don't know that I agree with that defeatist mentality, but the point is that all that attitude stems from the idea of getting their worlds back, right? And even Barbara says that, like, I mean, so that means that I won't just be some person from an alternate timeline that doesn't exist. Like, I would be an actual person with a home, right? And that's what Hal Jordan says. Everybody's world will come back, right? You want your lives, your friends, and your lovers back just as much as I do, right? And even Extant says, you owe me, Parallax. I worked for you. I deserve my Earth too. And Guy Gardner just responds in saying, you could really find yourself working with a guy like Extant, right? Is he the guy who gave you the muscle to pull all of this off in the first place? Now, for those of you guys who are kind of curious about like alternate reality characters and, what in the world's going on with these different versions, going back to realities that they don't come from, it's cool. We get an explanation about it all because Hal Jordan, in response to Guy's question, says, no, right? Extant believes I am right, as should you. And so at that point, Guy asked the question, then give me one good reason. And that's why Hal says, I've already told you, Gardner, Coast City was only one small indicator of a much greater problem. The solutions are new worlds and new galaxies. And that's where Guy's like, wait a minute, can you create life? And the response of Hal, yeah, watch me, I'm doing it right now. All these fledgling globules around you, right? They're just plasma energy. They will solidify and become planets filled with life. And the initial response is you're deluded, Jordan, you're a former Green Lantern. You do not have this level of power. And the response of Hal, actually I do. I really do have this much power. And that's what he says, right? It all started after our last fight, Gardner. I realized that my bringing back Coast City indicated a deeper desire on my part, a desire to turn back the clock. Once I was aware of that, I knew how to refocus my energies, that it took some doing, but I eventually slipped into the time stream itself and discovered something strange there. Energy anomalies, residue from the original Crisis on Infinite Earths when we all fought the Anti-Monitor. I managed to absorb some of that energy and eventually made my way to the end of time where entropy exists, the greatest destructive force conceivable. And he says the beginning and end of time are linked, in essence, a perpetual loop. All I had to do was manipulate it. In effect, bring the beginning and the ending of the universe close to one another. And as soon as that happened, everything in between would cease to exist. And that's the crazy thing, is because while forces were being marshaled by Wave Rider in order to basically try to create a team that could counter the forces of Parallax of Hal Jordan, that they all looked like they died, right? That was the initial appearance here, right? That when he appeared and they faced off against him, and then in that final moment, almost kind of like the incursions from Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, when those last two universes are crashing against one another, what Wave Rider had done was grab the remaining heroes, or whatever heroes he could, snatched them out and took them to the vanishing point. That's why you get statements like Kyle Rayner saying weird, right? I remember watching New York vanish, and the next thing I know, I'm standing on a Star Trek set. It just kind of blows people away. And so Wave Rider clears that up. He says, before Parallax could erase the last vestiges of time, I used my powers to move between milliseconds of what remained to collect those who would be needed. Now, one of the other explanations to offer here is that this Wave Rider we see here is not the same one from the very beginning of the story. That Wave Rider at the very beginning of the story, he was basically destroyed. The one that we see now is a guy by the name of Matthew Ryder, who was actually an occupant of the Vanishing Point and had been defeated by Extant, or at least subdued by Extant, very early on in the story. When that version of Wave Rider died, Matthew Ryder took his place and became the new Wave Rider in DC. And that's the one that we're seeing here. Now, we're also introduced to a character by the name of Damage. Now, technically, Damage had already been introduced in DC Comics at this point in time. The Grant debuted in his own solo series in April of 1994. He was created by Tom Joyner and Bill Merriman. But the reality here is that most people were introduced to him for the first time in Zero Hour, if I'm being honest, right? But the long and short of it is that he has the ability to absorb and let off explosions of nearly limitless energy. So he'll actually be very, very important as we get further into this. But everyone who's here is, for the most part, trying to figure out why they're here, which to a degree it makes sense. I mean, you do have Captain Atom and you do have Superman, two of the heaviest hitters that DC Comics has. But then you also have Oliver Queen, and as much as Oliver Queen is a fun character, he's just kind of like, dude, this is cosmic stuff. I don't like cosmic stuff. And honestly, what am I gonna do when it comes to I shoot arrows, man, right? And bang hot chicks. What am I gonna do about this cosmic stuff? But that's where Hawkman is I remember you having a very close friendship with Hal Jordan. And that seems to be the reason why he's here, that he be the one to talk Hal Jordan down. But the funny thing about this is that he rejects that notion, right? He's like, get real. The world is gone. There is nothing left to reconsider, right? And so Hawkman asks, like, what happened to that optimistic liberal philosophy that I've heard about when it came to you? And the response of Oliver, maybe it died with the rest of the universe, right? And so at the end of the day, this bickering is kind of quelled by Wave Rider, right? And he just says, like, there may yet be reason for hope, right? And even Captain Atom, right? He's just kind of like, I mean, yeah, like, everything is dead, man. Like, what reason could there possibly be to hope here? I mean, there's no reason to be hopeful, but it's really cool because Superman, being Superman, chimes in and just says, right, that talk is counterproductive, right? The reality here is that we could just roll over and just give up on everything, or we could try to find some way to win. And so that's why he asked the question, what are you suggesting, Ryder? And what he says is that at this very moment, Parallax is recreating all of existence according to his agenda. I propose we do the same thing. And so Superman's like, wait a minute, so you want to recreate the universe? Can we do that? Right? And the response is like, look, I mean, you know, like, sure, right? I mean, there's no reason not to. Right? In fact, he goes so far as to say, despite Atom's regression of intellect, we still have complete knowledge of time, because that's true, right? Atom has literally regressed down to being nowhere as intelligent as he normally is. But Wave Rider says, I say that we use that knowledge of time to rebuild time as it was before. And that's a crazy thing. It's because people are just like, Jesus, like, you guys are over here talking about manipulations of time. You're talking about recreating all of existence, because that's really what it is, right? They're basically saying, like, let's just beat Hal Jordan to the punch, right? Hal Jordan wants to create or recreate the universe. Let's make it before he can, right? Let's do that, right? That's the crazy thing is it's not going to be anywhere near as easy as they think it's going to be, because at that point you switch back to Hal Jordan and Guy Gardner and Alpha Centaurian and Batgirl. And the thing that's said here, right, impressive, we are witnessing the birth of a new existence. And even Guy is just kind of like, yeah, but like, I still think it's too much, right? I mean, the idea of playing God, you just don't do this, right? It's almost like a violation of the natural order. But the response of Hal is, why? Right? I'm erasing the Coast City tragedy and all other misfortunes forever. Anything bad that has ever happened to anyone goes away, and we can all live in places and a place where we don't have to worry about bad things happening. He visions it as a utopia, right? And he says, Guy, I can bring back most everyone who died, Kilowog, the core, even more. And why stop there? Why not 2 Earths? Right? One for us, and then one for the JSA, where they can all stay eternally young, right? And even Guy Gardner is kind of swayed by this. And he says, you know, that does seem better than old age and death, but what's the price of all of this, right? And even Alpha Centaurian is just like, I mean, my version of Metropolis would live in my alternate timeline, right? Batgirl's like, my alternate timeline would survive. They would all just be planets that would live out there within this singular universe. Now, how exactly it is that you make those work, you know, on a functional level, I mean, it's probably not that hard for someone like Hal. You just have them orbit a star, and you give the planet oxygen, and you make it far enough away to where it's basically an Earth-like environment. It might look a little bit different than Earth, or maybe it's an exact replica of Earth, but the form and function of it is almost irrelevant in the face of the fact that these people would no longer have, quote-unquote, alternate realities or alternate timelines that have been erased. They would all have a home, right? Hypertime would no longer be hypertime, right? Hypertime would cease to exist. Now, they're all just within this universe. They can hang out, they can cross over, they can visit each other, they can form relationships, they can do whatever they want to. It's all an open field. And even Batgirl just says, all I want to do is live. And that's kind of the beauty of what Hal Jordan says. And you will. You will have your Gotham City, and Alpha Centaurian will have his Metropolis. In my universe, everything will be as it should. Everybody wins. And in that moment, boom, he gets attacked from behind. Wave Rider and all of his forces show up here and they say, not a chance. That is never going to happen, right? And the response of Hal Jordan, a chrono blast, right? That can only mean Wave Rider. And so when they all roll up, the response of Wave Rider here is stop the twisted reality of yours before it starts. That's our point. That's why we're here, is to end all of this. And this is kind of like the moral quandary that came out of Zero Hour, is it was Hal Jordan asking the question, but why would you want to stop me, right? I'm literally creating a universe where there are no alternate timelines, right? All these people can have the lives that they always imagine. It would be essentially a utopia. I'm not dominating the wills of people. I'm not forcing them to worship me as a god. I'm just trying to make a universe where everyone can be happy and no one has to suffer with the pain that I lost. And the response of Superman, because you set yourself up as a god. You've killed billions of people. And the response of Hal, no, right? I'm giving life to even more, right? Can't you see that I'm right here, that things will be better? But that's actually an accurate statement, right? The reality here is that alternate timelines are alternate timelines. And from Superman's perspective, sure, like they're not alternate universes, quote unquote, but they do have inhabitants. Even if those inhabitants are shadows of the main DC universe, at the end of the day, wiping out any possibility they may exist means wiping out their existence. And that simply just cannot be satisfied, right? That is something that cannot be reconciled here. Sure, it would be great to have a utopia where everybody would have everything that they want, but not at the expense of countless lives. But from Hal Jordan, he just kind of sees it as a perspective of like their alternate timelines, right? I mean, the reality is that the people that are in the here and now, right? That's where things matter. That's what's important here. But at the end of the day, the forces stand against him outside of his immediate allies. You're sick, Hal. No one should toy with life the way that you have. You fashion yourself a god, whereas things as they exist now may not be perfect, but it is the natural order of things. But the response of Hal, you are all short-sighted. My vision is of a better universe, one that we have all fought for, right? One where we could all succeed, right? And he tells Superman, I do have the power to kill you, right? Understand that. Have no illusions. If I want you to die, you will die. And so in effect, he's telling everyone here, I want you to be a part of my universe. I want you to be a part of this reality that I'm creating. But if you stand against me, I will wipe out you and everyone you've ever met, and you will not continue on into this new universe. And that's where folks just end up kind of picking sides. Guy Gardner cannot take the side of someone like Extant, and by extension, cannot take the side of Hal Jordan here. But he just cannot do it. And so that's where Hal just says, I wish you could embrace what I'm offering, right? How about a Krypton that never blew up, Superman? Wouldn't you like to regain lost time? Captain Atom, they say that you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, so I had to erase all of existence to build a new and far better reality. In the end, it will be a paradise, a new age. But the response here, I'm really sorry that you will not join me, but it's time to end things. And in this moment, the Spectre appears and just says, nope, not gonna happen, right? The blood of your victims screams in vengeance. Let justice shackle you, and the fight is on. Because a fight between the Spectre and Hal Jordan, that's no small thing. I mean, this is intense. Hal Jordan with the power of a god, and Spectre, the living embodiment of God's wrath, right? For those of you guys who are kind of curious, this would be like almost like a smaller scale version of like when the Living Tribunal fought the Beyonders, so to speak. Although I don't even know that's really a fair comparison because the Living Tribunal got obliterated. So I don't know that that's a fair fight, but it's effectively a fight among cosmic beings, right? That's really what we're witnessing here, but it's as much a philosophical and moral fight as anything else, because where the Spectre says justice will not be denied, the response of Hal, I am not impressed. Spectre, do you want big? I can do big too, right? And the funny thing is that like Oliver just kind of like, they've forgotten we're here, which makes sense. I mean, small fries in comparison to the bigger picture, right? And Hal just says, forget it, right? Maybe once I never would have considered anything like this. I never would have considered wiping out all of creation to recreate it in a paradise. But the reality is that times have changed. And weren't you the one who always told me to get involved, Oliver? Or am I just getting involved in a way that you don't like? Now, madness, to a degree, I mean, there's a big difference between we should get involved and have more of a hands-on approach to things happening on the street level instead of in space, and like rewriting all of reality. These two things are not the same. And even like Extant chimes in and says, can't you see the world will benefit from all of this, right? Can you guys not get out of your own way long enough to see this is a winning lottery ticket, right? But Guy Gardner kind of has like this perfect response where he says, tell that to the billions of lives that you snuffed out. And it seems small, it seems innocuous, right? Yeah, tell that to the billions of people who died. But that's the moral quandary at the center of all of this. Sure, it's a paradise, but at what price is the paradise acceptable, right? And so that's where the statement's made by Alpha Centauri. I will not let you stop me from having my city. So that's the other side. People who are desperate to see a return to the life they knew, who are desperate to see a return to the world they knew that has since been wiped out for any number of reasons, and especially because of the ending of all things, right? And Superman just says, you do not understand, that you don't really understand what it is that you are asking for. And so the fight's kind of on between both sides, the folks who support what Hal Jordan is doing and the ones who don't, right? And again, philosophical quandaries. I'm kind of curious what your all stance is on all of this, right? But at the end of the day, Hal Jordan just says, none of you understand. I am tired of hurting old friends, but I will do what I have to. The Guardians found that out, right? And so in the face of all of this, Wave Rider says, we have to do something before all is lost, because this space that Hal Jordan has created, it's coalescing. This universe is coming into formation. If we do not stop it now, we'll never be able to stop it. Right? Literally, his perfect universe will become the universe that we live in. And so he says, Captain Atom, Ray, Green Lantern, Darkstar, I want you to begin absorbing the plasma energy universe that Parallax has created before it begins to solidify. But in fact, the most important part of all of this actually comes by way of a conversation between Oliver Queen and Batgirl. And that's what's so cool, is because she asked the question, and what makes you sure that you're so right? And that question comes in response to the question or the statement made by Oliver Queen, right? And when he says, look, kid, I really admire your spunk. In fact, you remind me of me once upon a time. But Hal thinks he's God. He's not, right? Because Batgirl had basically faced off against Oliver. And so when she asked that question, she says, look, I just stopped crooks. Most of this is just so well beyond me, right? It's way beyond what I normally do. But Parallax is offering a chance to start over, a new life in a new way. And that's the thing, is Oliver says, but it's not his choice to make. He's imposing his will on the universe, whether he sees it that way or not. It is a choice he is making for countless people. I guess it'd be different if he polled everybody, right? And a majority of folks said, yeah, sure, man, just go ahead and like recreate reality, right? I mean, anything's better than this. If like 51% of people said, sure, let's go with it, well then who are we as superheroes to argue with the will of the people? But it's him just coming along and saying, this is how I think things should be. I don't want anybody to suffer, so I'm going to do it. And that's why that conversation is so important, is because it jogs Oliver Queen into action, right? He says, my God, it's true. Absolute power does corrupt absolutely. Even Hal Jordan, a man who I always believed to be incorruptible. He's the closest thing to a brother I ever had, but I cannot let him do this. And so this motivates Oliver to act, because as the fight goes on between Hal Jordan and Spectre, as well as basically everybody else, Captain Atom and Green Lantern and Ray and all them absorbing the energies of Hal Jordan's universe, that we finally get a moment where it gets channeled into Wave Rider. When that happens, Wave Rider in turn channels that energy into Damage. And that's when Hal realizes what it is that Wave Rider's trying to do here, right? Channeling the energies of Hal Jordan's universe through himself and into Damage, so Damage can let off an explosion. That what Wave Rider's trying to do is create a big bang. He's literally trying to jumpstart a new universe. That's really what's trying to go on here. The funny thing about it is that because Hal Jordan is part and parcel, his power's tied to this universe, the more of the universe's energy gets absorbed, the weaker he becomes, to the point that he's mortal and he's not indestructible. And that whole moment is manifested when he goes to fire a killing shot at Damage to destroy him. Batgirl jumps in the way, sacrifices herself. Oliver Queen sees this, realizes that there's no saving Hal Jordan, and fires off an arrow into his chest and kills his best friend. He literally has to kill his best friend, right? And Hal Jordan just lay dying in the end of all of this. And so with Hal Jordan out of the picture, but all of his power absorbed and channeled into Damage, it's still not enough to achieve what Wave Rider is trying to achieve. So the Spectre channels more power into him and literally sets Damage off like a bomb, which creates a whole new universe. It's a big bang, right? Now, the reality here is that it's really more just blinking the universe out and bringing it back. But it does recreate everything. But it allows DC to go forward with these small kind of adjustments to the timeline, right? To kind of fix a few things here and there, where they basically set stuff to right as best as they thought they could following the post-crisis landscape. Now, it introduced just as many problems as it solved, but the fact is that one of the things that goes on here is that Wave Rider kind of tells everybody, look, this universe is in essence the same one as before, right? It's just subtle changes, right? Ripple effects here and there, which means that we all stand outside of space and time. It's the reason why you weren't destroyed when the Big Bang was created, but we have to put you back where you belong. It's not that dissimilar from like Avengers Endgame, right? When Captain America went back and put the Infinity Stones right where they were supposed to go, otherwise it would screw up the time stream. It's that exact same thing here. And so that's exactly what goes on, right? Each one of the heroes goes right back to where they were at the moment that 0 Hour started kicking off. And so at that point, everything just kind of reverts back to Wave Rider, the Linear Men, and all of them just kind of monitoring the time stream and just making sure there's no real other, major paradoxes or anything along those lines. But everything that comes out of this is considered the post-0 Hour landscape in DC Comics. With that being said, guys, this story will actually go directly into the story of Hal Jordan becoming the new Spectre in DC Comics. And then eventually he will lose the Spectre and he'll be resurrected, which goes into Jeff Johns' Green Lantern Rebirth. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.